There is a swamp on India's western border that went largely unreported for most of independent India's existence. It sits in the Kutch district of Gujarat, at the point where the coastline dissolves into the tidal interface of the Arabian Sea. It is about 22 kilometers long on the Indian side, with mud flats on both sides that change completely when the tide comes in and goes out. In the summer months, the temperature here exceeds 50 degrees Celsius. The tides are unpredictable and dangerous. The mud is so deep in places that a soldier on foot sinks before he can take a few steps. There are mirages, there is no shade, there is no firm footing. Locals have called this place Harami Nala for generations, the rogue channel, the treacherous waterway. The name was earned by decades of watching smugglers and infiltrators use this swamp as their crossing point between India and Pakistan. It is not a metaphor, it is earned description. And for most of independent India's existence, the people responsible for guarding this place, BSF Jawans, posted in some of the hardest conditions on any border anywhere in the world, did not have the tools to close it. For most of its existence, Harami Nala was a problem known mainly to those BSF troops and to the fishermen on both sides who shared its prawn-rich water. It was not a national security headline. It was simply a difficult feature of a difficult landscape until November 2008. And now, in June 2026, India's Home Minister is standing before BSF Jawans at Bhuj and publicly committing that within 2 years, this swamp will be permanently secured. The open door is closing. To understand why Harami Nala matters, you first need to understand why the border here is so different from anywhere else. Harami Nala flows from the Pakistani side into Indian territory in the Kutch region, close to Sur Creek, a disputed waterway between India and Pakistan that has never been fully resolved. The reason Sur Creek remains disputed is that wherever the exact boundary falls, there directly affects how much sea territory each country controls in the Arabian Sea fishing rights, sea routes, and potential energy resources beneath the water. Because of this long-standing dispute, the border near Harami Nala does not run along solid land. It runs through tidal water, through shifting mud, through areas that are clearly Indian at high tide and look like nobody's territory at low tide. The terrain makes it almost impossible to guard by conventional means. When the tide is high, BSF boats can move. When the tide drops, those same boats get stuck in the mud, and the crew has to wait for the next tide cycle before they can move again. Soldiers who try to patrol on foot in the mudflats sink and become immobile in minutes. In a summer, temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius make extended patrols a health risk for the troops themselves before any security threat is even encountered. Normal border fencing, the kind India has built successfully on large sections of the Pakistan and Bangladesh land borders, simply cannot be built here. Steel and concrete fence posts cannot be anchored in shifting tidal mud. The water level changes by meters twice a day. The ground is not stable enough for any permanent structure at the waterline. For decades, this combination of unclear boundary, extreme terrain, and changing tides has made Harami Nala one of the most exploited stretches of India's entire border, not because India did not try to secure it, but because the conventional tools available were fundamentally unsuited to the terrain. Around November 21, 2008, 10 Lashkar-e-Taiba terrorists left Karachi on a Pakistani cargo boat called the Al-Husseini. This is confirmed by court proceedings, India's investigation records, and the testimony of Mohammad Ajmal Kasab, the only one of the 10 who was ever captured alive. They were trained by Lashkar-e-Taiba at facilities that operated with the full knowledge and support of Pakistan's intelligence directorate. They carried weapons, satellite phones, GPS devices, and a plan that had been rehearsed in detail. Their target was Mumbai, India's financial capital, its largest city, the city that most represents the country to the world. After more than 36 hours at sea, the group located the Indian fishing trawler Kuber in the open Arabian Sea, reportedly off the Gujarat coast near Porbandar, based on what Kasab later told Indian interrogators. Security analysts believe the terrorists drew the Kuber alongside by feigning distress, then boarded it by force. The trawler had 5 fishermen aboard, including Captain Amarsin Solanki. 4 of the fishermen were transferred to the Al-Husseini and killed there, their bodies thrown into the sea and never recovered. Only Solanki was kept alive. The attackers needed someone who knew the sea lanes into Mumbai. Whether the al-Husseini's route used the Harami Nala corridor is what India's security investigators have long assessed and believed. But that specific detail cannot be confirmed from available evidence with certainty. What is certain is that 10 men crossed India's maritime boundary without being detected. The Kuber then sailed south toward Mumbai, blending into normal fishing traffic on India's west coast. It approached the city undetected on the evening of November 26, passing through the gaps in coastal radar coverage that the attack would make brutally visible to the whole world. About 4 miles off the Mumbai coastline, Solanki was killed. The 10 attackers transferred into small inflatable boats and came ashore at Badwar Park in southern Mumbai. Over the 60 hours that followed, 166 civilians were killed across 12 locations. The Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Terminus, the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel, the Oberoi Trident, Leopold Cafe, the Nariman House, Kama Hospital. 175 people died in total, including 9 of the 10 attackers. Kasab was captured alive at Gurgaon Chowpatty by A.S.E. Tukaram Omble, who grabbed the barrel of Kasab's rifle with his bare hands and held it while the rounds fired into him, dying so that India would have its only living witness. Kasab was tried, convicted, and executed in 2012. He remains the primary source for what is known about the maritime route the group took. India's security agencies have long assessed that the Harami Nala corridor was part of how the al-Husseini moved through India's maritime approaches without triggering surveillance. A well-founded professional assessment, not confirmed court evidence. But confirmed or not, what is beyond doubt is that 10 men came by sea, that the coast was not watching, and that 166 people died because of that gap. In 2022, India intercepted 22 Pakistani boats in the Harami Nala Creek in a single week. 22 boats in 7 days. Some were fishermen straying across the maritime boundary, as fishermen in tidal zones have always done. Some were not. The volume of intercepts showed better Indian vigilance, but it also confirmed that the underlying geography of the problem had not been solved. Catching boats is a sign of improved surveillance. It is not the same as a secure border. 16 years after the attack that made this gap impossible to ignore, Harami Nala was still India's most exploited maritime corridor. But something is now different, and to understand why it matters, you also need to look at what is happening on the other side of the line of control. India has always maintained consistently and formally that Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is part of its sovereign territory under illegal occupation. What makes the events of June 2026 significant is that this position is no longer being expressed only in diplomatic language from New Delhi. It is now being echoed by people on the ground, in public, despite the risks that come with saying it openly. Major protests have broken out across Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. The Joint Awami Action Committee, JAAC, has called a complete regional shutdown. Pakistan has deployed over 14,000 security personnel across the territory. At least 5 security personnel have been killed and dozens of civilians injured. Pakistan has cut the internet entirely, a complete media blackout, to stop the world from seeing what is happening. The United States, United Kingdom, and Canada have all issued formal travel advisories, with the U.S. Embassy specifically warning its citizens to avoid all of Pakistan-administered Kashmir. Western countries do not issue emergency travel advisories over minor civil unrest. This is significant. Pakistan's government responded to the international attention by issuing a statement rejecting unwanted remarks about its internal affairs. But Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is not Pakistan's internal affair. It is under illegal occupation, and the people living there are making that case themselves. The reason people in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir are angry is not complicated. Pakistan has held this land for nearly 8 decades and never developed it. It extracts the region's substantial hydroelectric power while charging residents some of the highest electricity bills in any Pakistani territory. Prices for wheat and basic goods are controlled from Islamabad. Revenue that flows into the region gets absorbed by Pakistan's Punjab and Sindh before much reaches the people who live there. There are no major universities, healthcare is poor, and across the line of control, they can see Indian Kashmir, with investment, with infrastructure, with connectivity, with a visibly improving quality of life, and they draw their own conclusions about which side of the line is better served. India's strategic analysts have noted that Pakistan is now simultaneously fighting the Balochistan Liberation Army in its southwest, the Pakistani Taliban on its Afghan frontier, and the JAA-led uprising in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Three simultaneous popular revolts against the Pakistani state. All of this while Pakistan's economy runs on IMF bailouts and its international credibility is at its lowest point in decades. India has maintained for 79 years that Pakistan's occupation of Indian territory is illegal and unsustainable. Meanwhile, India has been quietly upgrading the security architecture that protects everything it is building within its own borders. India's nuclear posture has just changed in the most fundamental way possible. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute published its 2026 yearbook recently, and inside its nuclear weapons data table is a number that has never appeared before. For the first time in India's nuclear history, CIPRI assesses 12 Indian nuclear warheads as deployed, meaning mounted on delivery systems, ready for use at any moment. In every previous CIPRI report, that number for India was 0. Since India became a nuclear power in 1998, its doctrine was based on credible minimum deterrence, keeping nuclear warheads stored separately from the missiles that would deliver them. The warhead and the missile lived in different, secure locations. This made accidental launch essentially impossible, but it also built a deliberate delay into the system between deciding to use nuclear weapons and actually being able to use them. What has now changed is that India's nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarines, the Arihant-class, are conducting what the Navy calls deterrence patrols. These submarines go to sea for extended periods, submerged, carrying live nuclear missiles. They do not surface until the patrol is over. 12 warheads are now assessed as deployed in this way. The doctrine has a new name: proactive minimum deterrence. The practical meaning of this shift matters enormously. INS Arihant and INS Arihant carry K-15 missiles with a range of 750 kilometers and K-4 missiles with a range of 3,500 kilometers. The newer INS Arihant can carry up to 8 K-4 missiles. A submarine with those missiles at an unknown position somewhere in the depths of the Indian Ocean tells every adversary something very clear. Whatever you do to India's land-based systems, whatever strikes you launch against India's air bases and command centers, there is always a response waiting in the deep water that you cannot locate, cannot target, and cannot destroy. This is called assured second strike capability, and it is the most stable form of nuclear deterrence that exists, because it removes any incentive for an adversary to strike first. The context for this shift is Operation Sindoor. When India struck terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan in May 2025, Pakistan formally convened its National Command Authority, the body that controls its nuclear arsenal, and signaled the nuclear option. India did not stop. The judgment was correct. Pakistan was not going to use nuclear weapons over a precision counter-terror strike, but the episode made one thing clear. As long as Pakistan maintains a nuclear doctrine that explicitly keeps first use on the table at any level of conflict, India needs a deterrent that survives the worst-case scenario. India's warheads at sea, on submarines whose location nobody knows, answer that requirement, and China and Pakistan both know it. The deployment of India's nuclear warheads at sea has not gone unnoticed. In the 16 months between January 2025 and June 2026, Pakistan launched 6 new Earth observation satellites, a dramatic acceleration for a country that had almost no independent satellite reconnaissance capability before this. 5 of the 6 satellites are in sun-synchronous orbits, which means they pass over the same geographic location at the same local time every single day. At the orbital parameters described, these satellites pass over India approximately every 2 days. One satellite is specifically configured for multiple daily passes over the latitude band that covers Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, and key Indian military installations in northern India. 5 of the 6 satellites were launched by China on Chinese rockets, and the technology to build them came from China. But the more significant detail is the data sharing arrangement behind them. China's own Yaogan military reconnaissance satellite constellation, was already integrated with Pakistan's intelligence systems before this program started. During Operation Sindoor, China shared real-time Yaogan satellite data with Pakistan openly, giving Pakistani forces imaging and maritime tracking capability they could not have produced independently. That data sharing continues today and has expanded. The Pakistani satellites now also feed their data back to China. Both countries are watching India through a combined intelligence architecture that neither could build alone. The specific purpose of this surveillance, as far as India's submarine-based deterrent is concerned, is this. A submarine is invisible once it dives below operational depth. No satellite can track it through the ocean. But submarines have bases, and bases have observable patterns. A satellite passing over India's eastern and western naval hubs at the same time every day can map when Arihant-class submarines leave on patrol, when they return, and how long the pattern cycles. From that data, an adversary can make educated guesses about when India's nuclear deterrent is at sea and when it is in port. India's response to this surveillance has been to extend the duration of deterrence patrols, keeping submarines at sea longer, reducing the time they spend at bases where they can be observed, and increasing the time they spend at depth where they are invisible. India's Space Defense Agency, formally established after Operation Sindoor, is now specifically responsible for monitoring adversarial satellite activity over Indian territory and protecting India's own space assets. While India builds its nuclear deterrence and watches the satellite competition above it, there is another security gap its defense planners are urgently working to close: the fifth-generation fighter jet. Indian Air Force pilots are considered among the most skilled in the world. Western and Russian air forces, who have exercised alongside them, say it consistently. The problem is not the pilots, it is the widening gap between what those pilots currently fly and what the aircraft they may one day face can do. India's own fifth-generation fighter program, the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, or AMCA, is still in development. Manufacturing has not started. The most optimistic estimate for the AMCA entering service is around 2030. Given that India's previous fighter development program, the Tejas, ran close to a decade behind its original schedule across multiple variants, the realistic date is probably 2032 to 2033. The problem with that timeline is straightforward. China's fifth-generation J-20 stealth fighter is already operational in large numbers today, and China's sixth-generation program, which removes the pilot entirely and integrates advanced artificial intelligence, has already been observed conducting flight tests. By the time India's AMCA enters service, India will be a full generation behind the threat it was built to counter. India will have spent a decade building an answer to a question the adversary has already moved past. Into this gap, Russian President Vladimir Putin has publicly offered something India has considered before: co-manufacturing the Su-57, Russia's own fifth-generation fighter. India and Russia actually had a joint development program for this very aircraft in the 2000s. India invested approximately $300 million in design work before withdrawing in 2018. The Indian Air Force's conclusion was that the technology transfer was not genuine enough, and that the aircraft's stealth performance did not meet India's standards. The fundamental difference between what Russia wants and what India needs is this: Russia optimizes for maneuverability and raw power, for aircraft that can dogfight at close range. India optimizes for stealth, the ability to enter contested airspace without being detected, because India's adversaries do not fight face-to-face if they can avoid it. That doctrinal difference did not disappear in 2018, and it has not disappeared now. Russia makes one argument that is genuinely difficult to dismiss. The Su-57 is the only fifth-generation fighter in the world that has been used in actual combat. It has flown missions in Syria. It has flown missions in Ukraine. No American F-35 has fought a peer adversary with serious air defenses. No Chinese J-20 has been tested in a contested environment against integrated systems. The Su-57's performance in real war is known. Everything else is simulation. That matters when you are buying a weapon you may actually have to use. India's hesitation today comes from the same concern it had in 2018. Not that the Su-57 is a bad aircraft, but that deepening its already significant dependence on Russian military hardware creates a vulnerability that India cannot afford. India currently sources around 60% of its military equipment from Russia. Operation Sindoor, during which Russia maintained official neutrality, showed India exactly what that dependence feels like when it matters most. For now, India presses forward on the AMCA, continues the conversation with Russia, and compensates for the gap through upgraded Rafales, advanced electronic warfare, and the pilot quality that remains one of India's enduring advantages. India is now building a smart border security project worth thousands of crores of rupees across both the Pakistan and Bangladesh frontiers. It brings together drones that can patrol where soldiers cannot walk, radars that can watch the sea at all tidal states, thermal cameras that detect movement at night across mud flats that previously offered perfect natural cover, watchtowers built above the waterline so that surveillance continues whether the tide is in or out, and connecting roads, medical facilities, and accommodation that mean BSF Jawans are no longer fighting the terrain itself before they can start fighting the threat. At Harami Nala and Sir Creek specifically, 70% of this infrastructure is already complete. Shah committed publicly at Bhuj on May 29, 2026. The remaining 30% will be finished within 2 years. India is not treating difficult terrain as a reason a border cannot be secured. It is treating difficult terrain as an engineering problem with a deadline. The doctrine underpinning all of this is called the quadrangular security grid. Under the old system, the BSF stood at the fence, and other agencies helped when needed. Under the new system, 4 pillars work together simultaneously across the same zone: BSF at the border, Army backup in sensitive sectors, civil administration governing border districts and improving conditions for the communities that live there, and state police handling law enforcement and intelligence across the full 15 to 50-kilometer zone behind the fence. As Shah told his troops directly, it is not 4 layers. It is a joint responsibility of all 4 stakeholders against every threat at the same time. The security responsibility does not stop at the fence. It covers the territory behind it. The same security transformation is happening on India's eastern border. And the story there is not about difficult terrain. It is about political will and the complete reversal that happens when a government is replaced by one that actually treats border security as a priority. India shares a 4,096-kilometer border with Bangladesh, running through 5 states. West Bengal has the largest share, 2,217 kilometers. About 1,600 kilometers of that is currently fenced. Around 600 kilometers remains open, unfenced, and in many sections effectively unmarked on the ground. That 600 kilometers has not been waiting for money. The central government allocated the funds years ago. It has been waiting for land. Under the previous Trinamool Congress government of Mamata Banerjee, West Bengal repeatedly declined to transfer to the BSF the land required for border posts and fencing infrastructure. In many cases, land that had already been formally acquired and paid for by the center. Amit Shah wrote 10 letters to Mamata Banerjee personally. The Home Secretary held 7 meetings with the Bengal Chief Secretary. In January 2026, the Calcutta High Court ordered the transfer to be completed by March 31, 2026. That court order was ignored. 600 kilometers of international border remained open because one state government chose not to act. Not because it was impossible, because it was a choice. In the 2026 West Bengal state elections, the BJP won. Suvendu Adhikari became chief minister. At his government's very first cabinet meeting on May 11, 2026, the cabinet approved the transfer of 600 acres of land to the BSF within 45 days. 9 days later, on May 20th, 142.79 acres across 9 districts were formally handed over in the first phase. Additional tranches followed. Adhikari's approach to illegal infiltration from Bangladesh stated publicly, detect, delete, deport. What 10 letters and 7 meetings and a high court order failed to produce under one government was done at the first cabinet meeting of the next. The security gap was never a geographical problem on India's eastern border. It was a political problem, and the political problem has now been resolved. India is in transition. The border it had and the border it is building are not the same border. The security posture it held and the one it is now deploying are not the same posture. The transition is not yet complete, but the direction is clear and the commitments are public. At Harami Nala, 70% of the new infrastructure is in place, and the remainder has a 2-year deadline attached to it by name. In West Bengal, 600 kilometers of fencing that was blocked for years by political choice is now actively proceeding under a government that treats it as a national obligation rather than a political inconvenience. In the Indian Ocean, 12 nuclear warheads on Arihant-class submarines are at sea, telling every adversary that no first strike prevents India's response. India's Space Defense Agency is watching the satellites that watch India's naval bases. The fifth-generation fighter gap has a domestic program working toward it and a foreign offer being evaluated. Nothing is complete. Everything is moving. And in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, the territory India has claimed since 1947, the people who live there are now making India's argument for India, in their own streets, at their own risk, against a state that is deploying 14,000 security personnel against them and cutting their internet to prevent the world from seeing. India does not need to fire a single shot for that argument to reach every diplomatic forum on earth. The people of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir are doing it themselves. India is growing at 7.7%. India is attracting $95 billion of foreign direct investment every year. India is selling weapons proven in combat to over 100 countries. India is finding gas in its own ocean. A country building this fast needs borders and defenses that match what it is becoming. And India is building them. On the water, on the land, beneath the ocean, and in space all at once. The open door that may have let 2611 through is closing. The territory Pakistan has occupied for 79 years is rejecting that occupation from within. The nuclear deterrent that existed on paper is now survivable at sea. The border infrastructure that was always needed is being built with a deadline. Every piece of the security architecture India has needed for decades is being put in place now, with money and doctrine and political will behind it. Late is not too late. It is being done now. Thank you for watching this through to the end. It means a great deal. If you found this useful, share it. That is the best way to support the channel. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.